gather together to talk about God's Word and learn things that will help us live lives that are pleasing to Him. We're studying a series of lessons called Rules to Live By in this Sunday morning class. If you're looking at your study guide, we're on lesson 5. If don't worry about it if you don't have it, you can follow along with us in the scriptures we'll be discussing. But the phrase, which I do think can be made into a rule to live by, the phrase is that a house divided against itself will not or cannot stand. So that's just a statement of fact. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Now, how that would become a rule to live by is that we should do everything in our power to avoid having a house divided against itself. Okay, so the concept is live so that your house is not divided. If you think about it, we are members of some different, or I guess I would say we are members of multiple houses or families. And we're going to talk about those in our lesson this morning. Let's go to the text where Jesus made this observation. In Matthew chapter 12, beginning at verse 22, it says, "Then was brought unto him one possessed with a devil, blind and dumb, and he healed him, insomuch that the blind and the dumb both spake and saw. And all the people were amazed and said, Is not this the son of David? But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, This fellow doth not cast out devils, but by Beelzebub, the prince of devils. And Jesus knew their thoughts and said unto them, Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. If Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. How shall then his kingdom stand? And if I by Beelzebub cast out devils, by whom do your children cast them out? Therefore they shall be your judges. But if I cast out devils by the Spirit of God, then the kingdom of God is coming to you. Or else how can one enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he first bind the strong man, then he shall spoil his house. He that is not with me is against me, and he that gathereth not with me scattereth abroad." Okay, all right, so the house that he was talking about, in other words, take the accusation of the Pharisees against Jesus. Yeah, this is not, he's not manifesting the power of God. He's doing this, he's casting out devils by the power of Satan. And Jesus' response to that basically is, that doesn't even make any sense. That's silly. Why would Satan provide power to go against his own interest? In other words, if I'm casting out the demons by the power of Satan, Satan is working against himself. He's going against his own purposes. He's actually acting contrary to his known agenda. And so Jesus is basically saying that accusation is just silly on the face of it. No one would do that. And I think we agree that Jesus' observation there is a fair one. This is a senseless accusation. But, so contextually, that's how Jesus was making that point. But our notion this morning in the lesson is Jesus is putting forth a principle there that's applicable across the board, not just in this specific application. This specific application was about casting out demons by the power of Satan. Jesus said that would have Satan against himself. That would have Satan's house divided. That doesn't work. But the concept in the broader sense is any house divided against itself is in trouble. Any house divided against itself will not prosper, ultimately will fail. And so that's how we're going to approach what Jesus said. Certainly Jesus was making the point that his ability to cast out demons was not something given by Satan, but something given by God, and he was doing this as proof of his deity. We talked a lot about the miracles that Jesus worked, and the miracles that Jesus worked were intended to reveal his identity as the Son of God and confirm it to be true. Jesus healed a lot of sick people. And a lot of sick people benefited by the healings they received, no doubt about that. But the healings were not exclusively just to help sick people. If that was the case, why don't those powers continue today? If the intention was just to benefit the recipient of the miracle, sick people getting healed, demon-possessed people getting the demons cast out, all that. If that was the reason, if that was all that was for, why didn't it continue? Why did it ultimately come to an end? Because that wasn't the prime. The answer is that was not the prime reason of the miracles. The prime reason for the miracles was to reveal and confirm God's truth. In regards to Jesus, it was to reveal his identity as the Son of God and confirm that as being true. And this is certainly not the sum total of the kind of miracles that Jesus performed, but it's one of the kinds of miracles that he performed. And it contributed to that conclusion. Jesus is the Son of God. So it was for that purpose. Final question in this regard. Is Satan's house divided? That was the last question that the author asked regarding this. Well, I would say emphatically no. Satan's house is not divided. You know, you can say a lot of things about Satan, but one thing is, he's effective in his business. He knows his purposes. He has a goal. He has an objective, and he works tirelessly to that end. Speaking individually, his goal is to cause you to be lost forever in hell. And he is not giving up on that. And he's working straight forward to that. He is agenda-driven. He is on point. And everything he does goes to that end. Now, we have a way to escape that outcome, but Satan is not going to work against himself. Satan is not doing things to hurt his own outcome, right? J.D.?
Yeah, when you think about it, I mean, Satan can win a whole lot of different ways. In God's way, you can only win one way. So Satan has lots of tools. He can just convince you to be apathetic. He can convince you to just directly attack God. I mean, there's a lot of different avenues.
Yeah. And we've made this point a lot, and I think it's a fair point. Satan's got a whole lot of tools in his toolbox, and he's got some new ones, some really effective ones. We think that the modern media, going back, even decades or even centuries ago when they began to do print media, that was a new thing for him. But now digital media and the internet, Satan's got to be loving that. He's got to be loving that. That sure helps him get to his goal. And he's using that because he is not divided against himself. Tom?
Satan's goal is to divide the house. It started way back in the beginning.
Now say that again.
Satan's whole agenda is to divide the house. That's one of his tools.
Is to divide our house, yeah. Not his, but ours, yeah.
Going back to, Adam and Eve in the garden, all he had to do was just get them to question God and, start thinking different than what God told him. So he started dividing right then and there. Man has made his choice down through the ages, follow God or follow Satan. And inevitably he turns to follow Satan. The other argument that Jesus makes in this whole thing is, all right, you say that I'm doing it by Beelzebub. Evidently, these Pharisees and things had accepted that practice of, casting out demons. And he asked them, well, if I'm doing it by Beelzebub, who are your children doing it by? It can't be, me by Beelzebub and you're by God. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. That sort of raises a question. Did the Pharisees themselves have the power to cast out demons? I would argue that they didn't. They would pretend to, or they would present themselves as having that power, but I would argue that they didn't. You remember the episode in Acts chapter 19 in the city of Ephesus, Acts 19:13. Then certain of the vagabond Jews, exorcists, took upon them to call over them which had evil spirits, the name of the Lord Jesus, saying, We adjure you by Jesus whom Paul preacheth. And there were 7 sons of one Sceva, a Jew and chief of the priests, which did so. And the evil spirits answered and said, Jesus I know, and Paul I know, but who are you? And the man in whom the evil spirit was leaped on them and overcame them and prevailed against them, so that they fled out of that house naked and wounded. You know, that last expression almost makes me chuckle. You know, they were obviously charlatans. They were fakers. They claimed to have the power to do exorcisms, but they did not. Obviously, the demon was more powerful than them. That was not the case when Jesus or inspired people by the Holy Spirit cast out demons. So when Jesus said, "Who do your sons cast out demons?" I don't think he is saying your sons have the power to cast out demons too. Who are they doing it by? I don't think he's acknowledging they had the power. I think he's just saying, what are they doing? Whose power do they claim? But I don't think they actually had the power to cast out demons. We know that there were people who faked that power in that time. There are people today who claim to have that power. The Catholic Church has agents, various priests and so forth, who claim to be exorcists. It's all wrong. First of all, we don't believe that demon possession can even exist in our world today. We believe that came to an end. Certainly the power to cast out demons came to an end when miracles ceased. The whole business of, but there are modern day people who are claiming to be exorcists, but they're not. Okay, so now that's the premise. A house divided against itself cannot stand. So the author goes on to say the most common and obvious use of the house in Scripture is to describe the home or family. How well will such a house divided against itself stand? Well, Jesus stated a truism. The truism is a house divided against itself will not stand. So what about our house? What about the house of our family? What about the family units that are represented here? What if our houses are divided? Well, they're not going to prosper. So what are some of the ways? The follow-up question to that is, what are some of the ways in which our personal houses might be divided? What do you think? What's some ways where we might be divided? Anybody?
Well, it's well documented. Financial is normally the primary cause. Infidelity is the second. And third is different philosophy of life.
Okay, so Paul mentions 3 things there that got to be on the list, right? One of them is financial. You know, usually, and Paul's right, usually if you read about things that cause divorce and breakups, one of the high-ranking reasons for that is issues with finances, family finances. So here you can picture the scenario. Here's this guy, and every Friday when he gets his paycheck, the first thing he does, he goes to the bar with the boys, and he drinks, and he gambles, and he loses the vast majority of his pay for the week. And at home, his wife and kids don't have enough to just provide basic necessities, food, clothing, shelter. The utility bills go unpaid. The house payment's not made. The rent, they don't have enough food. They're struggling just to make ends meet because this deadbeat dad is wasting the family's money, and his wife begs him and pleads with him about the difficult circumstances they're in. He turns a blind eye to that. He won't listen. How long is that going to stand? Well, that's doomed, right? That situation just won't stand. So financial problems, to be sure. So moral issues, right? Moral issues in general. It could be infidelity, or it could be other forms of moral issues. You know, we talked the other day, and we won't get too far off on this today, but, you know, in addition to the sin of adultery, which obviously divides families, there's all kinds of other immorality or immoral acts. We talked the other day about pornography. You know, pornography is causing huge problems in families in our day. And this goes to the modern media and the accessibility of pornography, more accessible in our day than it's ever been in the history of mankind. You know, I think it's always dangerous when we say we live in the worst of all possible times, because I don't think we do. I mean, try to convince Noah that we live in tougher times than he did. I think that's going to be a hard job to sell. But we live in bad times. We live in very immoral times, and so different forms of immorality.
Add to the pornography thing. I'm wondering if it's also just screen time in general, because if you look at the main issue outside of with pornography, I guess inside pornography, is you have the time that your spouse is dedicating to that, not you, and you have concerns with that. Well, same thing with the screen time with the phones and the games and the this and the that and the tablets. I'm meeting more and more families where that's a real issue, where children aren't being neglected, both sides. Things are being neglected.
Yeah.
Because of this. Just
I think you're exactly right. You know, you hear some of these statistics about the amount of time that some of these gamers are online, and those guys will. Some of those gamers will be on like.
You say guys and gamers,
Yeah.
but it's. I mean, I don't mean to be stereotypical, but it's Candy Crush on
Yeah.
the phone.
Yeah.
It's things like that are just absorbing.
I've read where some of those gamers will actually play continuously for 24 hours straight. You know, they take drugs to keep alert, and they don't even get up to go to the bathroom. You
I
know.
wonder what they could do if they put that much effort into something.
Yeah. So if this is a husband,
Right.
and he's doing that, and completely neglecting his wife and children, obviously it's a house divided. Obviously, right? So Paul mentioned finances, moral issues, and then a third one that I think is really powerful is differences in faith and doctrine. You know, my wife and I do not agree on basic doctrinal matters, and I'm going to tell you, I'm not even willing to talk about it. I've built a wall there, and I'm not even going to address that anymore. I'm over that. Well, that's a house divided, right? And we've talked about that a lot. And to our young people, we always try to give admonition. This is critical business when you're in the courtship phase. You know, if you and your intended do not agree on doctrinal things, that's going to cause problems. You know, right now you're dating, you're on your best behavior. You know, maybe your person that you're dating is acting tolerant and sort of accommodating to the differences that you have doctrinally. But they're not. He or she is not coming around, but they're not making a big deal out of it. I'll tell you, after you're married, that's gonna bubble to the surface, and that's gonna be a problem. And that's why, we always urge young people, choose a mate that shares your faith and conviction to the Lord. Now, the question's always raised, does that mean that Christians should only date Christians, that a Christian should never date a non-Christian? I'm not saying that necessarily, but you got to have your eyes wide open. You're dating this person who's not a Christian. Are they teachable? Are they interested in spiritual things? Can you convert them? Can you convert them before you marry them? Because if you can't convert them before you marry them, the odds go down exponentially that you won't convert them after you marry them. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying it gets harder and harder. But that's a house divided. That is clearly a house divided against itself, and that's not a situation that is going to prosper. Anything else? I think Paul hit on three really strong ones there, Bob.
I think there's a divide in the offspring of the family unit that departs from God,
Okay.
for whatever reason.
Okay. So if I was going to put that under a broad general topic, I would say discipline. How we deal with children and how we're going to relate to the children when there are issues. And that could be young, matters of how we discipline them when they're little, or when they're big and grown up. And we have differences about how to discipline them if they're not living right. And so raising children from toddler to adult, dealing with children and how. So if the husband and wife don't agree on that, that's going to be a problem. So I think child rearing rules. And now when I say child rearing, I'm not talking about just when they're little, but even when they're older. How are we going to relate to our children? Clayton.
Exact example I was going to go to. I know a Christian couple and the young kids, and the mother says no spanking, spanking's not allowed, and the father says, I can't discipline my own children. So then they're kind of running wild, and just a single topic was tearing the house apart.
Okay, so what you're saying is don't underestimate how serious that is. That can be a huge issue for sure. Exactly right.
I hate to hijack the floor, but if I could add one more thing.
Yeah, sure.
You talk about children, a lot of times, people whose parents live in different places. So you have a young married couple, now you have to decide where to live. Are we going to live with my parents on this coast, or your parents on the other coast? Or are we going to live in the same state, both are, however that works. But that's a big issue when you're young and in love and everything's great, you can rush into that and then not really think ahead of, okay, where are we going to be in 5 years?
Yeah.
Or we're going to be in mom's house.
Yeah.
There, I don't want to live there. I want to live, over here.
Yeah.
Works better over here. I want to live
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And I've seen that.
Okay. So that would go to family relations, but it's a little different subtopic, but it goes to family relations. Can be very troubling. Family relationships can be very troubling. House divided. So what are we saying though? What's our application? We want to do everything possible to avoid house divided kinds of situations. So we just enumerated what some of those are, but those have to be addressed. In other words, so go back to the very first one that Paul mentioned, financial issues. Our house is in trouble because my wife and I don't get along about how we spend our money. Well, you just keep going? You just let that situation linger? No, you got to address that. You got to come to terms with that, because if that continues, the house is divided, it will not stand. It won't prosper while that. So all of the things that we mentioned here are certainly problem areas, but the main takeaway is avoid those issues. If they exist, remedy them. If you haven't gotten into that problem yet, don't go there. But in all of those kind of things, you can't let that situation continue. All right? Anything else under that topic of house divided when we talk about our families? All right. I think those are all really good observations. Let's go to Ephesians 5. Still talking about our families, house divided. Ephesians 5, you know this text, and we won't take time to read it all. This is a very familiar text to us about husband and wife relationships. Ephesians 5:22, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as unto the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. All right, let's just stop there. That text goes on, but the point is established here in these initial verses. The author mentions distinct roles for husbands and wives, and that's just the truth of the matter. It's not politically correct to talk about wives being in submission to their husbands. The modern feminist movement has really been a hurtful thing and has caused a lot of houses to be divided. When we engage in any enterprise, whatever it may be, someone has to be the acknowledged boss or head. the ultimate authority. The buck stops here kind of a situation. Yeah, if we had a business, let's say if all of us went into business together, you know, we have come up with a neat idea to make this little gadget, and we think that it will sell by the millions, and we've all invested our money, and we're really committed to getting this thing out into the marketplace. But everybody is the boss. We're not going to go far, right? We have to come to an agreement and say, okay, Eric, you be the boss. Eric, you're the CEO. You make the final calls. We're going to submit to your judgment. You know, Paul will be our financial. He's the CFO, you know. And we'll give several different guys positions of authority, but one ultimate authority, right? Eric's the main guy. And we're going to do what he says, right? It has to be so. I mean, our business is going to fail if we can't come to an agreement like that. Right? Everybody knows that. Well, that's the same notion when it comes to our families. There has to be an ultimate head or authority figure. God has assigned that role to the husbands. Now, that doesn't mean that the husband has to be a mean, overbearing, jerk. I mean, but he is still the ultimate head, and God has ordained it to be so. And if the wife is not willing to agree to that arrangement, or if the children are not submissive to their father, that's a house divided. It won't stand. Thoughts or comments here? Anybody? Yeah, Don?
Here will balance a house out, and husband and wife have got to be balanced first before they can run a house with the kids. Because if they're not balanced, then the kids are already out of balance with the family.
Oh, I think you're exactly right. Exactly right. But so the husbands like those first verses, right? Wives submit. Wives submit. But the countermanding concept is in verse 25. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. And an old preacher friend of mine always said, and I think exactly right, it's not hard for a wife to submit to a husband who loves her like Christ loved the church. You got to get. If you get both sides of that working, it's a house not divided. It's a house united. But both sides of that have to work. Rita. One thing works against the other. Yeah.
The reason I bring that up is because our society and the women's movement is all against men because they've had so many men so overbearing at women. And even years ago when I first started working, and I'm sure even some of the people that started working before me with women, men treated us awful. And it was awful. And you had to just suck it up, buttercup,
Yeah.
And so anyway, it's good to hear more sermons. It seems like I heard a lot of sermons about women, but I never used to hear a lot of sermons about the men role. But learning more about, the men and their role encourages me to want to love my husband more because, they don't need to be hard, tough guys. It's okay if they cry. It's okay if they're angry.
So, but again, what you're saying here is it takes both parties doing their part biblically, and then that's a house united. If either party's not doing their part, then we got a house divided, and it's not going to stand. I didn't like the next question. What can a wife do to lend stability to a home? in which her husband is not a Christian. I changed that and said, even if her husband's not a Christian. And that's addressed in 1 Peter chapter 3. So here's a wife, her husband's not even a Christian. Or even if her husband is a Christian, but what's she supposed to do? Well, she's supposed to submit, right? 1 Peter 3, verse 1, likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation or manner of life of the wives, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear. So, I think what the wife does, what do you do in a house divided? What do you do when either your husband's not a Christian, or he's not a faithful Christian, or he's not even trying? What do you do, wives? How do you handle it? Well, you keep doing the right thing. You just consistently keep doing the right thing. And this text here says that it very well may be the case, and we've known of instances like this. Many of us have known multiple instances of this, where a wife won her husband to the Lord by being consistently faithful in all things. I can never, we know this to just be a general rule. I can never let someone else's failure be an excuse for me to fail. Well, maybe I did show out. Maybe I did say some things I shouldn't have said, but he provoked me. It's his fault because of the way he approached me. No. He may have approached me wrong, but I still got to do right. So I can never use the other person as an excuse for doing wrong. And in regards to family relationships, families have issues. Let's just make it clear. Families have issues. We all know that. I can't let somebody else in the family who's not acting right be an excuse for me to do wrong. I think the principle here is consistency. And then in that same text, 1 Peter 3, verse 7, it also addresses the husbands. 1 Peter 3, 7, likewise ye husbands dwell with them, your wives, according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. By inspiration, Peter calls upon husbands to understand the differences between men and women, the different roles that God has given. Dwell with them according to knowledge, and honor your wives. Notice, I've always thought that last phrase in that verse very important, that your prayers be not hindered. There's nothing that can keep you from feeling right and being able to approach your spiritual duties. Nothing worse than conflict between husband and wife. So, husband and wife have a big argument. And so, do you feel like sitting down right after that and praying? Usually not, right? Usually after there's been a big blow up, that's the last thing from your mind. You're just not in a mental state to be able to sit down and humbly pray to God. I think that's the idea here, but of course it's broader than that. It's more than just an immediate prayer. I think the expression that your prayers be not hindered is just the general notion is it will slow you down spiritually. It will keep you from being effective spiritually if there's conflict between husband and wife. And so, house divided. Don't let that happen. Again, God-assigned roles. All right, real quickly before we run out of time. The other house of God in the New Testament is the church. And in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 15, 1 Timothy 3:15, Paul says, if I tarry long, that thou mayest know how thou oughtest to behave thyself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. The house of God, we would say the family of God. We need to view our situation here in the local congregation as a family. And there's a proper way to behave in families. So in my own personal physical family, I try to be careful how I act. I try to be careful how I talk. And when problems arise, I have a desire to work that out. I don't want that to linger. I don't want that to continue. You know, we know how we act in our physical families. We ought to carry that over into our church family, if you will allow that terminology, and we ought to behave accordingly. He asked, as he had asked in an earlier question, he asked in this question, what are some things that threaten this house of God with division? What would you put on that list? What are some of the things that can divide this house? Tom?
Paul writes to the Corinthians here. I think Paul, 1 Corinthians, talks about several things that divide church history. They were doing that. They were finding different people and setting them up as priorities. Some of their feelings on, the resurrection of Christ. Some people evidently didn't believe that Christ died and was raised again. And Paul just goes back to, evaluates that.
All right, let's talk about a couple of those things. Well, one of them is church discipline. He addressed that in 1 Corinthians. They weren't doing that job right. That can divide a local congregation. We have talked many times about the necessity of withdrawing ourselves from unfaithful people. We've got to do that. But when that happens, sometimes there are members who don't want to participate, who disagree, who don't believe in that, who don't want to follow through with that. That can be divisive.
Sometimes in the past, even here, I've heard about, discipline somebody, withdraw from them, and some members come up and say, that's the most cruelest thing I ever heard anybody do anymore.
Yeah.
But it's not that we're cruel, we're trying to make them ashamed and make them turn.
People don't see it, but it is an act of love and concern. I think you're right. Wade?
Selfishness, putting one's needs above others.
Okay, selfishness, for sure, absolutely. So, all kinds of false doctrines can divide us. Not practicing discipline, doctrinal issues, worldliness, divisive opinionism. So, I've got this personal opinion, and I'm just going to press my point. I want to try to get everybody to come around to my way of thinking on this issue of this opinion that I have. That divides churches. So, in all of those kinds of things, again, our point is avoid them. So how do we avoid being divided over doctrinal issues? Well, we sit down with our Bibles open, right? And we work through it. If we are all honest and open and we carefully study subjects, we can understand the Bible alike. A lot of people think we can't. That's wrong. God gave us a perfect revelation. We can understand the Bible alike. If we're open to the truth, if we're willing to study it, we can come to an agreement. So if it's a matter of doctrine, we sit down and keep our Bibles open, keep studying on that. If it's a matter of personal opinion, then we can yield. You don't have to follow my opinion. In matters of opinion, we don't have to divide over those. Everybody's free to practice their own conscience in those matters. And we don't have to divide over opinion. On doctrine, we have to agree, and it's possible. Wayne, did you have a thought? Okay.
I'd like to add that
Yeah.
one thing that we talk about in prayer and in our lessons here is submitting to the eldership, because you can't have a church without what we talk about in the family, where you got that one, the Bucks house.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The rest of us just have to submit, no matter what we are in our secular world, whether we're the head of our own household, when we're in these doors, we have to submit.
Good point. Good point. I think that's right. And I've known churches that had huge troubles because the members didn't want to submit to the elders. I think you're exactly right. Tom?
The other thing you have to recognize who the head of the church is. A lot of denominations go through, have a worldly head, and it conflicts with, Christ and his message.
Yeah.
And if you can't agree on that, no matter what you do, you're going to be divided.
We got to submit to the ultimate head, right? Don? Yeah, there's a lot of parallelisms, and I think that's why the scriptures call this a family, because there's a lot of things that work the same ways in families. I think you're right. Anybody else? real quickly, notice the Apostle John, who's known as the Apostle of Love, mentioned some divisions in the church family. 1 John 2:19. 1 John 2:19. John is describing some who he identified as Antichrist, and he says, they went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would no doubt have continued with us, but they went out that they might be manifest that they were not of us. And so there was division in the church, even in the first century, while apostles were still alive and working. There was division. And part of that, 2 John verse 9, is not sticking with the revealed truth. 2 John verse 9, whoso transgresseth abideth not in the doctrine of Christ hath not God. He that abideth in the doctrine of Christ, he hath both the Father and the Son. So divisive things existed in the first century, and it was a departure from truth. That causes this family to be divided. The last point, and maybe a little bit of a stretch, but in 2 Corinthians 5, verse 1, Paul describes each of us as a house. And so this is talking about individual persons. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 1, For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, and house not made with hands, eternal in heaven. So here, last point, he said, I, as an individual, he calls a house in that text. I can be divided against myself. In other words, if I don't have a clear laser focus on what I'm committed to, what's important, what I want to accomplish, where I want to go when this life is over, I can be working against myself. So I say that I love the Lord, and I really want to go to heaven when I die. And I come to church every Sunday and I sing louder than anybody else. And I word beautiful prayers, and I really give off the impression that I'm devoted and very committed. But then, and I really feel that way on Sunday, But then during the week I get out here and I'm with my worldly friends and I do the things they do and I go where they go and I act like they act and I talk like they talk. That's a house divided. I'm divided against myself. And that's not going to prosper. It will not stand. That's the whole point of this lesson. Again, I think we, more so than just identifying what these problems are, we want to say that the takeaway is avoid this. Avoid all of these kind of things that we've been talking about. And that then becomes a rule to live by. The rule to live by is avoid the house divided. Okay? Thanks, everybody.